that those students had a percent higher exam score overall on average, and that those in lecture-only students were 1.5 times more likely to fail the course, and pretty significant. So we're looking at about 30% failure rate on average with lecture-only classes, and somewhere in the high teens classes that had some type of activity. And specifically, they noted that these effects were greatest in relatively small classrooms. So that kind of fits into yours and my classes as well. But it's a great paper. It's not very long. It's a little bit dense. But the point is, and I think we all know this pretty well, the more we can make our classroom more active, the better. So what I'd like to do today is just kind of share three things that I've done. So briefly, dipped into active learning a little bit over the course of my last 10 years at LR. In '99, I started using inquiry-guided learning, which is something I'll talk about a little bit. I learned about kind of this process-oriented inquiry learning, which is something very similar, but this is something that you can buy books on. So instead of coming up with your own inquiry-guided learning exercises, something for most of the sciences, you can just buy, which you can either straight up use or just give some good ideas instead of starting from scratch. In 2013, I learned about the flipped classroom at a workshop, and that fall I flipped my organic class, and that's where I am right now. So I've been using inquiry-guided learning last 8-9 years, and I've flipped my classroom for the last 5. All right, my 3 tools I'd like to talk about today. The first is adding a live audience response system, and this is something that I really love. It's something that I would never take away from my class. I don't use it every day, but from where you are, I would like you to grab your cell phone, or if you have a computer in front of you, and you can install an app if you want to, or you can just text to the number 27607, text the word Joshua Ring 460, or if you go to a website, you can go to polev.com/ I know that is. Can you see my mouse?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can know that this reached over a little bit. You can type in Joshua Ring 460. We'll get an idea of how many people are there, kind of how you're accessing this. But I loaded the app. It's pretty easy to use, and it just pops up with the questions. Otherwise, if you text, you can just text answers. We'll go to the... That's okay. I bet that you have it somewhere. Or you share with a friend or something like that. On the website. I have an app for it. Yeah, on how to do this, please let me know. I can't see anything but just yell. Oh, someone's texting. Someone's texting in class. Yeah. Ooh, there we go. So once you start texting, you can just text the letter A, B, or C, and it'll just pop up on the screen. So as you're doing this is something that you can do in class very easily. There are, of course, positives and negatives with having students use their cell phones, and there's other ways to do this without actually using cell phones. But it's pretty easy. All of our students have their phones in class, as we know. Some will have a laptop out, but it's a really quick and easy way to get feedback from students on what they're doing, and sometimes we'll make games out of it too. But I find this to be something that I would use in every single class period, but it ends up being something that I use about once a week. All right, so idea how many people are in the classroom. From my count, we have, what would that be, 4 to 1 to 2?
15 people here.
Okay. Well, you have another minute if you want to go in, or if everybody who has a phone or a computer is satisfied doing it, then we can move on. What do you think?
I think
good?
Yeah.
All right. So there's a couple different ways that you can display this to people. You can see now that there's a little timer in the corner. And you can set your primary teaching area, and this is something where instead of just a multiple choice question, you move on to, hold on 1 second for me. It was go to this one.
Hang on. Oh, are you guys logged in online?
This would be, there you go, writing. This is what is your primary teaching area, and you can either type it in if you're using the computer, or you can just type it into the spot here.
Just right smart. We are
You can type in as many things as you like.
just what you're going to do is you're going to text in your responses. So type down network, so type that in, and that's going to show up on the screen. So,
Wonderful.
just stay in text mode.
So,
Tell me what your area is.
dental, hygiene, okay, it came up as two different words.
Those are
So one thing you can probably tell is that it creates a little bit more of an active environment already because people are thinking about it, typing things in. It's just kind of a word cloud and it's a live update so we can see that most of the folks in the room are writing. We have one STEM person. The chemistry person was me, unfortunately. Lots of math, so a little bit less STEM, but I think that's just fine. So what you can do in this case is, the way that WILDs obviously work is that whoever is, whatever responses come up the most, those will be largest, and so you can kind of tell where your students are a little bit. But another way that you can get feedback and you can kind of see where students are a little bit. So this I've used it. I did just more or less in class, and I'll show you what I've used. Is I use these little clickers. Basically what we have is 24 of these little clickers and a little USB, just kind of a radio receiver. And so the students don't use their cell phone in my class, but we could the exact same way. Basically, I had someone who, at my university in the area, had a big set of these that they were never using, and they just let me use them. And I've been permanently borrowing them for the last 5 or 6 years. But if something like this, then there is no drawback of students kind of checking their phone and seeing what else is going on. So I like these a little bit, but if I didn't have these, I would do it anyway and ask people to use their cell phone and just ask them to put them away when they don't have questions. The advantage of using something like this, and basically, I don't know how well you can see that. It's just like a remote control with 12 buttons on it, and so it's only suitable for multiple choice. You're getting actual responses in terms of words. They can't do this very well. I use it to see how well the students understand what we're doing right now. So we'll be talking about something. I'll just put a question on the board and give them a minute to do it, and we'll see how well they get the idea. And I won't display results live. There's a lot of settings for that. I'll just have a question up there, and after the end of the timer, whatever it is, a minute, we can display it, and you can see if percent of the students are getting it right. Great, we don't have to spend time on it. But if only 20% of the students get the question right, usually we'll stop and say, okay, give me an idea of what you don't understand. Let's go through this together, and kind of be used to bring us all up to speed. And then, kind of likewise, do we need to spend more time on this type of question, or even on this topic? And finally, sometimes I'll use this as a game where I'll split the students into groups. We did it before our final exam. We reviewed all of organic chemistry in the course of 45 minutes. And we just split it into kind of a team-based game. And so I had students in groups of 4, and they would all be competing against each other. It would pop up and tell them which team was winning at a given moment. But in terms of students talking to each other, when there's nothing on the line but a win on the line, it doesn't count for anything. They're very involved. So when it's tested, it seems like they care a lot more. Anyway, so the question they might see in my class, 9 seconds to answer what is the name of the following molecule. You don't have this question, so you don't have to type this in. Something like this, I'll put in structures. It must be very difficult to text these in, so what I was just given multiple choice of different structures. It takes a little while to make these, but once you've made questions like this. So this is something that I find is really helpful. I really get it gets the student involved and lets me hear their voices without them having to raise their hand. So Is there any way that you think you might use this in your classroom? So this is something, again, that you can type in. I think the app, for some reason, it's not popping up right now. I will switch that over. I'm not sharing my screen, but we'll activate.
So just type in, describe how we put it.
You can kind of hear, yes, all right. So how might you use this in your classroom? Is there anything specifically, besides a yes, no? So I'll put it there.
Yes, Joe, for you. Okay, so John, on my phone, this is Jennifer, September 3rd. I think I like the idea of, I do like problem solving in class, so you have them provide in groups or as individuals.
Right.
And have them submit their multiple choice. And, I mean, so many times you look out there, they pretend they understand what's happening, but they really don't, so it would be really more kind of result.
I can't hear you very well. I don't know, Mike.
Sure, this is Jennifer.
Hi.
Hi, and I've been thinking about what explain to the September and trying to incorporate it more. And I do think it could be used for when you have some problem class. And if everybody gets it, you say what's the right answer,
Right.
and you can find out.
Right. We ask students in general, do you get this, or what's the answer? We'll anecdotally always get the one or two students who do understand, and we'll say, well, the answer is obviously this. We won't hear from anybody else. So it allows you to hear from everybody, instead of just the students who really know what's going on. Or, you know, once in a while you'll have a student who doesn't understand. I had one semester who would say, you've told me is clear, everything's confusing, tell me again. Every single day. And you know, if that's the driving voice in the room, then it's everything down, and it seems like no one understands. This way I get kind of instead of anecdotal feedback, you get a lot of feedback. All right, so end of lecture quiz is great, review or wrap up of class. There's an end to the number of things that you can do with this. STEM Network can provide mini grants, wonderful. Yes to review learned material. I think this is a great thing to review. This is me. I might have the students tell me how well they understand the content. Determine if students are ready to move forward or if they want more examples. I think that's fantastic. And because it's live, you can get an idea, and kind of it lets you improv your class a little bit and tell, am I good? Should I move on? What can I do? My students, which is the thesis? That's a great question. Assess what students know problems in class. Right, and so you can give it to everyone, you can split it up a little bit. But I think this is a fascinating tool that I don't think it can stand alone and doesn't change very much the way that we're running our classes right now. But it can be integrated into, I would say, almost any class. All right. So the tool that I've used from Active Learning is an inquiry guided learning. An inquiry guided learning, which is a little bit nebulous because this can be done in many, many, many different ways. It's way less concrete. To me, the idea of bringing scholarship into your classroom is part of learning, and letting students discover for themselves what the right answer to a question is, or even an answer that they had to work for. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but in general, you give students kind of scaffolding, support, or a way that they can kind of answer questions on the way towards an answer. So a lot of, I mentioned already POGIL. I've got a link in there for something that you can look up for POGIL. POGIL is these workbooks, and they basically are a series of questions that let students work on their own towards an answer or toward a concept, usually that we know already in science. Some things don't work very well. You're not going to have students come to the right guess to answer how, what the names of the bones are. Not any class. However, there's a lot of topics, and I'll show you some in a minute, where the concepts that we talked about last week, the students might be able to use those concepts or apply those concepts to figure out for themselves what I would just explain to them this week. And so, in general, you can see that this is broken down. Philip broke this down into a number of different ways. The easiest way, I think, is this kind of idea of identifying. What this graph is basically saying is on the left here, this is where the teacher frames the inquiry or asks the question. And on this bottom, we have that it's the idea of inquiry for exploring existing knowledge, so things that we know already. So this is the idea of mostly what I do in my class, which is I know the right answer, and I'm going to pose you a question, and I want you to work your way to the right answer, towards the knowledge that we have already. Student search would be more this idea of students asking their own question and working toward an answer that isn't generally known. But you can be more or less supportive of that, and the questions can come from students or faculty, but to me, when I'm working through it in class, I'm usually staying down here a little bit in terms of the students are exploring things that I know the answer to, and I'm not asking them the question, but it's often more meaningful for them to apply what they know already to learn a topic instead of me just explaining it to them. So I'll give you some examples of this. When we get into acid-base, and acid-base is something they learn about in general chemistry. They learn about high school, they learn about in probably maybe like a physical science class or something like this. But they've had acids and bases forever. But asking students to actually use structures to explain why something is relatively more acidic than something else is a real challenge for students, even though they've seen it so many times before. So what I have is a week where we really go into the details of what makes an ion more stable than another ion. And they'll have them work together in a group for about almost the entire class period. And I'll just give them a worksheet that's 2 pages long, where it starts off with a very basic mechanism of an acid-base reaction, which we can see right here. And I'll ask them to kind of follow guiding questions and talk about them and work through them one at a time. And what it gets down to is the idea, and I put kind of some asterisks next to questions that I want them to check with me, which is defining base in terms of electrons. So just base is a hydrogen acceptor. But specifically, the bases more helpfully in organic chemistry are that share electrons with hydrogens. And so you can get them to work into, well, why would they want to share electrons? And they usually see on their own that, well, this one would want to share an electron because it has a negative charge, which fundamentally the problem with the negative charge is that there's too many electrons, therefore they have too many, and they can kind of relate back to the idea that if I have too much of something, I might want to share it. So this is something we will work through over time, and basically I will, during a class like this, spend my time walking around and listening, jumping in, usually just guiding them back into the right path, but having them discover the answers to these questions on their own. So this can, obviously you can cover a lot less material in one class period if you're doing something like this. Sometimes we have classes, at least I know that I do, I don't project on anything else, where not a lot of content, I just really need them to understand it deeply, and so that's the kind of thing where I will use this. In lab as well, and I'm not going to read through this entire thing, a lab called the Fisher Esterification in the second semester, where I'll give them a procedure on how to cook up a product, which is going to end up being a mixture of different things. Usually it'll be a different mixture of 3 different molecules, and all liquids. Then ask them to use what they know already from previous semesters, so building on existing knowledge, to purify it. And that can be messy because I'm not telling them how to do it. And, you know, with labs, usually they'll come into class expecting us to just tell them what to do so they can follow it. And I won't answer any of their questions. I'll just say, go back to your old lab or just try it and see what happens. You can see at the bottom underlined that I grade them on that lab based on their thoughts and explanations, not on their actual yield. So when we're expecting them to basically follow a process to discover their own answers, we need to really kind of how do we grade them, because it needs to be a little bit different. The idea should be that we want to see their effort, we want to see them get to the right answer, but we want to see, understand how they get there. And so I think it goes to a deeper learning, but again, I think that you'll end up covering a little bit less content if you're doing something like that, but you can really delve a little bit deeper. So flipped learning, IGL is something that there are many really good resources. I have some links in here for some references, but it's something really neat, and there's usually a topic or two that people can think of right off the bat. That might be something that students could work their way towards. So, once again, I want to get your feedback. Is there something where you think inquiry-guided learning might be able to be used in your classroom. If you have any questions, just yell out because I know that I'm moving really quickly today. You can text that. You can pop that right back in. I don't think anybody is using. Oh, there we go.
We have, and Josh,
Shoot.
is there a way to have students give them a sign number, let's say, so they know that everybody responded and who's responded with what, so that actually, if the same student is responding incorrectly constantly, I want to know that rather than
Yes, there is. You can have students link their names so that when these answers pop up, I'm doing it anonymously today, but you can have it so that they actually sign in, and for this you can actually see who's writing what response. This thing that I experimented with in my class, giving them actual points for how well they get things right, but generally decided that I want them to respond, and sometimes they wouldn't respond if they didn't know the right answer, and so I don't count it for anything, but it is definitely something that you can count for points. And who's answering.
Yeah, do you see, sorry, question? You make anonymous on the screen, but only you see the person who's...
Good question that I do not know the answer to.
Okay. I can look at
a lot of these live response systems that have popped up and down, everywhere has, there are very many layers to this where what I'm showing you right now is the free version. You can use up to 40 respondents. So in a class of 200, you have to pay for a bigger version, which comes with more bells and whistles. But for what our class size, you can run it on the free version. It's really easy to use. The app is free for the students. Before I was at a university where students had to buy clickers, and they always hated that because the classes might use different clickers. Just use the same ones that I bring into class and pass them out and collect them again. But this is something where everybody's got a cell phone that can do. But yes, as you have their number or you get them to sign in with a specific name, you can do that. So I realize this might be more tricky, but I think about the ideas of like nature. So how do we name organic molecules? That's something where there's just a right way to do it, and I just need to teach them the right way to do it. It's not really something that I would expect them to inquiry guide their way. So this is more of a conceptual thing that I think really has to build on past knowledge. To me, inquiry guided learning is something that you can practice a little bit more in lab, or even day. It's something that you can dip your toes into and not have to worry about doing over the course of the entire semester. If it doesn't work, the data didn't work very well, but it's not a technology that you have to, class. I haven't seen any responses here. I don't know if anybody is thinking about or typing anything in, but we can move on if no one has.
I think we're ready to move on.
All right. So this is a really big question that I wanted to hear from you on. Do you see any barriers to this or problems that you could see with implementing inquiry guided? Because that's those things, not just could you use it, but what's standing in the way? Or what don't you get? If you're looking at this on your screen or your computer, probably what you see right now is that if someone puts an answer in, you can upvote it. So this is something for clickers that what you can use is what are questions at the end of the day, and what students can do is they can write in their own question, or they can see someone else's question and basically move it to the top of the screen and give it more authority if it's something that they really want to have an answer to.
Fear I have is that in lab, whenever we try to do anything inquiry-based that doesn't have specific instructions, or instructions are complete intently, what happens is there's a long quiet period, and then one of the better students figures it out, and that information ripples through the lab. And so only students are actually doing the process, and everybody else is just writing down or copying the other students.
Yes, great. So when I do that Fisher esterification in lab, what we'll do is give the students different starting materials. so that they all end up with different boiling points. They all have slightly different solubility, and so there is no one right answer for everyone. I do it in class. I'll split people into groups so that it's not, no one's answering out loud. I'll oftentimes kind of stop halfway through and kind of give a little mini lecture that's, 2 minutes to say, okay, this is why the right answer to this is this, so that we're all on the same page. Okay, keep going from there. Because some groups will go faster, some groups will go slower. Lab it is a little bit tricky, and this is something that I experimented with for a while, is if everybody's doing the exact same thing, you're right, one person will figure it out, or one person will have thought to try to Google it ahead of time. And a lot of times our undergraduate labs are pretty straightforward. They can find something similar online. So what in that case is I don't even tell them what their starting materials will be until they get to lab. So they can't really look it up ahead of time, the right answer. But part of the issue is to help them see that the process of figuring out for themselves is much valuable than the right answer. This is something that I will remind them very often when they're doing clickers, is that in my clickers don't count for anything. What matters is they're practicing for the next test or the next quiz. And so I don't care if they get them wrong right now. It'd be great if they knew everything. But the point is to see what they're getting wrong and then be able to address that so that they learn and don't make that mistake on the test. And what that'll do is give them the answer a little bit, and so that they'll be willing to put something out there. And when they put something out there, we can work from that. That makes sense. Sure.
Technology. I just back to, I tried last year the question slide, and my phone is saying that it's recording.
Yeah, well, you have to click on the link and go to online poll. So this is the feature that allows you to vote for responses. I just got that too. So Josh said this poll is an online poll, not a text fed, or a feature you can change.
So what I have done is I embedded it into my PowerPoint, and it seems like it is crawling a little bit at the moment. I don't know that. Oh. So
The texted information to this poll, it bounced back an error message that requires to go to the online poll.
oh, sorry about that. Okay, I've made that. I changed something really briefly. Try just typing hi or something like that and see if it pops up.
Okay, to text for this?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, hang on. Okay, me too. Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it there. Yeah.
All right. So did it work earlier?
No, it has to do with the lines. The texting
Okay.
worked earlier, but for this specific poll, text enabled.
So that might be in my settings. I don't use poll everywhere all the time because I usually just, like I said, use the clickers. But so I'm sorry about that. I don't know, worked on the earlier one and didn't work on that one, but you can see the screen right now. Basically, this is all. I assume you can see this at the moment. This is all it is what potential barriers do you see? Basically, I just made a question, and that's it. Oh, there you go. Takes this time to get 74 people up to speed. And so maybe if I go to the web, then it'll load. Type high into that. But there are things that we can play with. I'm sorry that I didn't have that perfected before we came in here today. I don't know why I worked on the earlier ones, but it's pretty easy and simple, and I'll see if I can make it work on the next one. Just yell at me if it's not working, and I'll modify that too. All right, so the last that I'd like to talk a little bit about is flipping my class. And so this is a big thing that I'm sure you've heard about, is flipping classes these days. This is the hardest of the three to implement because it ends up being something that is relatively large, but I think it can be done one class at a time. There's been a lot coming out lately about flipped classroom in higher education. It's something that really started high school push, again, in kind of in science math, but to me this is something that humanities has been doing for, I'd say, more than just decades. But the idea of students should read something ahead of time and come into class ready to talk about it. So the students do a little bit of work ahead of time, they come in ready to go and ready to use their group time. This is not the way that math has done it, where we come in and just tell you the right answers and tell you how to do something. And so I think this is new to STEM, but really not new to humanities. So I think humanities So the definition that Robert Tower came up with in his book, which I think is really good. The idea is that the first contact with new material is done by students before class, and then class becomes a way that you practice it or apply it, and it depends a little bit on the subject matter, but that we use our group space in a way that is for group work, as opposed to if I'm lecturing to someone, we have the technology to pretty easily do that in another way. So an old-timey way of, or I guess a low-tech way of flipping, where you could just have students read these 2 chapters in the book ahead of time, or read about how to do this one problem, practice a couple problems, and then come into class. But the idea is that you give them work to do beforehand, and then instead of lecturing in class the entire time, spend a lot more time with kind of an interactive environment. The way that I've done this, and this lot, I went through and recorded all of my videos using a pad, using an Apple Pencil. The first time I did it, I used an old iPad. The resolution was awful, but the tech is great these days. The app I used is called Explain Everything. It was $3. I uploaded to YouTube, which was free. I embedded questions in them using PlayPosit, which is a program that is free. So basically, for me, what I had to do is I had an iPad, and I spent $3 on a program to do it. However, it was a lot of time, because I took all of my lectures and turned them into videos. Is that not just planning those out, I had brand new lesson plans for in class, because by putting my lectures out of class, I hadn't developed, well, what would I do with an entire hour class if I wasn't lecturing? And so it's neat and it's wide open, but it was a lot of work. So I would not recommend doing all of that at once for an entire semester, but it is something that you can do for one class, telling students on something that you think they can handle outside of class, saying, read about this, come into class, and we're going to just apply it. So there are simple things in chemistry, there are simple things in, I think, any field where you can tell them ahead of time, I want you to read about how to name an alkane. Come to class and I'll answer questions and go into it together. So I'm to try to fix this really quickly, but I want to start with the problems. There are a couple ones that come up very obviously about potential problems with a flipped classroom. So let me go over here. What potential? Oops, sorry. Alright, so I'm going to access. So hopefully this is active now live. So what that should do, if you have a phone, try texting me and see if that pops up. Just say hi.
Josh,
Yeah.
so when you ask students to do that, come in with something, you check that they have nothing, or?
That is the question I was going to type in, because that is the single biggest concern, and the biggest thing that I see is, should be active right now, and hopefully we should see it, is what do you do if they don't come into class ready? So, I work with this a lot, I struggle with this a lot, not from the student idea perspective, but for the, what do I do if they're not ready? Because sometimes students think, yeah, there you go, students not working before is a huge issue, so I'm going to vote that up. Boop. All right, congratulations, someone, you got more points. What do you do if they don't come in before? Oftentimes I'll have 1 or 2 students that are just not willing to do the work before class, and I think that those are, we're going to have students who aren't willing to do anything, and so I don't think that, if it's a couple students, I don't think that that's unique to the flipped classroom. It's a problem with some students who aren't willing to do it. But what I have found is I explain to them at the very first day, in fact, I use something like this with clickers, and the students, when do you need me the most? Is it most helpful to have me when you're learning for the first time, when you're being told how to do something, or is it most helpful to have me when you're working problems and trying to apply it? And almost unanimously, they will say that it's most helpful to have kind of the expert in the room when you're practicing something for the first time. So I think they get the idea of why it can be very helpful to set things up this way. But there are different things that I've done to address that. One is that I have embedded in the videos a way that I can tell whether or not students are doing it. I don't grade them on that. I think that's something you could do, but it doesn't fit into my grading system. But you could grade them basically on whether or not they're ready to go in class. I will call students up to the board, merge impulsively. And so if they're not ready for class, it's not like intentional shaming, but it's one of those things where they have to say, well, I wasn't ready for class. I will a lot of times just have a page where they have to do. I'll always assign them problems to work on, so it's not just watching a video. I don't think that watching a video is very helpful unless you actually practice it right away. So I'll always have, I'll give them homework problems, as I think we all do, but I'll give them one page of very simple ones to practice before class. And I'll always start class with those questions. So after the first couple weeks, they will realize that if they've done those questions, they're really missing out on the opportunity to ask for some very specific help. And the students do ask for very specific help. That idea, what if they read but don't understand very well? To me, that's totally fine. If they're putting forth the effort before class, it's a less that we need to do during class. And so with any topic, if you're telling them the first time, usually they will say, I'm sure you've all heard this, well, it made sense when you did it. But then went down and tried it on my own, it was way more difficult. And so if they're trying something before class and then they come into class, we usually have some better questions to ask than they would otherwise. So start with questions, but also get feedback from students before class. I have built into my videos that they can give them right questions or anything like that afterwards. And a lot of times I'll just say, I didn't understand this topic. And I'm going into class that that's what we need to work with. And I start every single class with questions. It's just, you understand, where can we go from there? And so students will quickly see that the students who practice and try things and see what isn't working for them will then be able to ask questions, and they're the ones getting the help that they need. And so I always encourage students when I meet with them one-on-one to be that student. Be the student who tries before class, comes in and knows what they need to do. And I'll do, besides having them come up on the board, is check those answers. It's just tell the students, I'm going to check your answers when you come to class. Answers and early in the semester, if there's a day where not a lot of people have their problems done, I'll tell them basically this doesn't work. Frankly, we're going to crawl through this today because we're having to start from scratch since you guys didn't do this, and I'm only willing to do this once a semester. We have that kind of come to Jesus and say, this is a problem, this class doesn't work if you guys aren't prepared. Since you're not prepared today, we're not going to cover a lot. You're not going to have a lot of help on these more advanced questions, but they're going to be on the test anyway. We're all shooting ourselves in the foot. It makes a big difference. They tend to be very prepared after that. But if students aren't ready, I've told them coming to class and working on applying problems is step 2. If you don't do step 1, step 2 is going to be bad. What you cannot do, what I cannot do, what professors doing this cannot do, is be willing to go back and re-lecture it. Because if you do, you'll quickly learn that they don't actually have to work on it. So I start class when we start problems on need to challenging problems based on them having done the work. And if they haven't done the work, they can see that it's a waste of time. And I will tell them, if you haven't done the work before class, sometimes if it's a problem that's ongoing, class. Like, just stay. And if you're not willing to do step 1 and step 2 is going to be a waste of your time, spend your time actually doing the work. That's the only way you're going to learn this. And I've had a couple students say, I'm really sorry, I'm going to go do this right now, and they never make them. Classroom dynamic thing, it works great when the students are ready before class. And if the students value them getting ready before class, I feel like, from my experience, they will do that. Yeah, it can be a big problem. It usually gets to me to be a big problem about 2 weeks into the semester, where the students feel like, well, this is going pretty well, so I'll conk out, when we're doing the easiest stuff. And I said, if I just kind of ratchet up how hard the class is, and it's a good practice when you're doing the hard problems. Students, for the first time after I started flipping, would give me feedback that the exam is easier than what they were practicing in class. And that's a really good feeling, because when I was lecturing, I would always get those feedbacks in course evaluations that it's harder than the examples you did in class. But if you're telling something for the first time to a student, you have to give them a pretty easy example as their first example. So having them do those first couple of examples outside of class, answering those questions at the beginning of class, we can really get into some neat application and also get into some neat kind of advanced questions that take them beyond what they have to be tested. I know that was an answer, but I think that's a really important question about the class. Other questions? Okay, so my last question for you is, do you see, oh, that's, so do you think the things that to you would be suitable for flipping? So the idea would be, is there one lesson or one topic that you do that you think would be suitable to be flipped? So to me, the easiest place to start would be something that is, maybe you can draw some lines of what you want students to get out of a specific class. So say that for a specific lesson, I want students to A, B, C, and D. So those are my 4 goals that I want students to get out of class today. I think are simple enough that students could learn them without me, and 2 of them are relatively complicated, and I think that they could learn way better with me in the room. What I'll do is take those first 2 things and shift them to pre-class. So sometimes I won't give them the full video to watch before class. I'll give them about half of the lesson, the stuff that I think they can process and can handle by themselves, and get that easy stuff out of the way ahead of time. And say, well, when you come to the class having done that simple stuff, I will answer your questions on that, and we will build to the harder stuff together. And so to me, a lesson that would be good for flipping would be where there is simple stuff that could be told to them or would be easy for them to just read. And then after that, could we get together and really spend more time on that more challenging concepts, the deeper stuff that we can delve into, but now we'll have a little bit more time because we shifted some of the simple stuff to pre-class work. So if you can think of it and type them in there, that should be running right now, and we should see this one. Okay, so yeah. You tell me it's working, then it's working. Okay, it's working. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that. All right, so it's not working for you. Any ideas that you can kick out loud for all of us?
This is an example, but solution solubility, when you have solutions, you have to predict the product. They have a hard time learning how to write correct formulas and then balancing them. They confuse the 2. And I was able to this class, but I would really like to spend more time having them make class.
Something probably simple enough that you could even just say, look at this one section or these 2 pages in your book before class, and I want you to come to class with these, these questions answered.
Right. The solution really carries through a lot of general knowledge. So it's not that it would build on later, so it would be something I'd like to spend more time on.
All right, so they're friendly for non-traditional students. So do you mean that the specific technology of flipped or technology in general?
The flipping.
Right. So what I have found is I expect my students to use the course management system. We Canvas, I don't know what you all use, I assume Blackboard or something like that. Web anyway, and if they can use the web, what I have found is that my older students, my kind of traditional students who come back, a lot of times I'll have pre-PA students who are just taking organic chemistry for the sake of a class before professional school, and 19 to 20-year-olds. They're the ones who get the most positive feedback about having videos because they're like, listen, I can do this on my own schedule. I can pause and rewind things when I don't understand them. It's actually given me the most feedback. So I thought that this would be something that would work best for my 20-year-olds, but it's mostly been the older students who have told me how much this helped them very much. I will tell you that with video, there's a lot of really good ones out there already. You may or may not Khan Academy, but they have everything. But it's a simple to do to say, read or watch this one video before class and try a couple problems. Come into class with your questions, and that would be an easy way to flip without having to make your own content. So I think that case studies in nursing classes, I think, is a really great one too, where you give them something ahead of class. You give them, a case and say, read this, think about it, and sometimes give them kind of some guiding questions. So, read, I want you to look for the answer to A, B, and C. And those could just be big, open-ended questions. So they put in some of that work where they really have to spend some time and think about it before class. This is what I'm doing right now, I think, is an awful version of flipping. Because asking you right away, how might you use this, is not a very friendly question for 3 minutes. It's a good question to think about, marinate in your brain cells for about a day, and come to later and say, okay, I have this idea. I think it might work in this sort of case. So that's a lot of flipping, is to give these questions way ahead of time. Let the students kind of think about it if they're willing to. Some will come up with something right away, but some have to spend a little bit more time kind of letting it work through their brain a little bit. Then they can come into class and they'll have questions or say, really, I just didn't understand this at all. But it gives a really good place to work from. And I think the idea of a case study is a great one, where they get something ahead of time.
Do you find
I do not. I have not. Like I've shifted all of my material in a way that I could. I just find that I'm going to teach organic chemistry fully online. Have you taught online?
yes, technology? So it's easy for me to teach the classes online. It's a little trickier to teach the technology classes online.
I think so. There's online class and teaching is a whole other.
Yeah, I'm thinking to engage the online students using the tool might be fun.
Right. So do you teach synchronously online, or is it asynchronous where they're all going at their own speed?
Asynchronous.
Okay. So that's where clickers might be a little bit more difficult or something like that. And it might work better in forums or something like that. But I kind of, the live response stuff is great for live response, but I don't know. I think of these technologies as things that I've used in a face-to-face class that frankly become a little bit hybrid, where they're doing some of their work online and some of it in person as well. A whole different type of technology that could be used for the online classes. It's been rushed and been short. I mentioned everyone in September who came that you would implement any of these things exactly as I presented them today, but I hope that maybe it sparks some ideas of things that you could do that are maybe completely different from mine, but I think that a lot of times the professional development, I come away with my new ideas that were sparked by something completely different, and I hope that's something that you've done today. But any questions in general? We have a couple minutes left. These are really good kind of intros to inquiry-guided learning. This third one here is a paper that's really, really deep. This book right here down at the bottom by Claire Major is really just all about having specific activities that you can do, kind of one-shot things in one day to make learning a little bit more active. They're very high commitment. There's a lot of very simple things, so that's definitely a book that I would recommend. It's a lot of things that you could just try in one day. Really just add a little bit of activity to a class that you're doing. Good question. I can Chris take it.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, we really appreciate you taking the time. Your clarity is just awesome. And your I'll be following up with you. Ohio? This is it. I'll be following up with you.
Okay.
Great. Okay. Thanks.
Happy holidays. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.